She initially dismissed the concern. Ridge had told her that everything was done professionally, and that the boundary between them was now clear. But the look in his eyes as he spoke was not the same as when he was fully present with her. There had been a distance, one she recognized all too well. It was the type of expression that indicated his heart was already straying. Taylor had seen that face more times than she cared to count, and it never looked good. She promised herself she would not read the tabloids or visit fashion gossip sites. But she did. Initially merely once a day, then several times in the morning, and then compulsively. Every headline that didn't include Ridge and Brooke felt like a relief, and every image of them together felt like a dagger. And today, when she unlocked her phone and saw the image on the homepage of a fancy Italian magazine, she froze. Brooke and Ridge were standing on a bright balcony that overlooked Lake Como. Ridge's arms were wrapped around her in a genuine embrace. Brooke was laughing, her head thrown back, and Ridge was staring at her in the same way he used to gaze at Taylor decades ago, before everything was ripped apart, sewn back together and ripped again. Taylor took a close look at the caption, which read, "Destiny Reunited. Ridge and Brooke back together in Italy." She didn't know how long she'd been sitting there, breathing shallowly, her heart pounding like a war drum in her chest. A deep, hollow agony radiated across her sternum. It wasn't all heartbreak. It was something else. A constriction. A pressure she couldn't resist. She tried to rise up, hoping that some fresh air and movement might help. But her legs went out beneath her, and she sank on the floor, still clutching the phone. Her breath came in quick spurts, and her thinking was cloudy and distracted. She groped for her phone again, attempting to call someone, anyone. But her fingers refused to cooperate. The memories flooded in, unwelcome and harsh. The day she first met Ridge. His eyes brightened up as he saw her across the room. The passion. There was laughter. The heartbreaks. The betrayals. The children. The family they tried to establish on the rubble of something that was constantly disintegrating. Moments of happiness that felt like lifelines, followed by gaps that expanded until everything fell apart once more. Taylor remembered standing by Ridge during every storm, seeing him drift back to Brooke time and again. And each time she assured herself that she was strong enough to manage it, that he would return, that she could forgive, that she'd moved on. But she never truly had. Not entirely, because deep down she always imagined herself as the protagonist in their story. She laid on the soft tiles, a warm breeze brushing against her cheeks as a farewell. The world became darker at the edges, and the aching in her chest worsened. She thought about her children. She thought of Steffi and Thomas. She wanted to see them and tell them. What? Was she sorry? That she loved them more than anything else, including Ridge and her own shattered heart? But she was unable to talk. I couldn't call out. Only the sound of birds in the distance responded to her. Her respiration slowed and became shallower. Then there was stillness. Thomas did not find her until several hours later. He had came over to check in, sensing something was wrong. He'd spoken with her just 2 days before, and while she sounded fatigued, nothing seemed amiss. But when she didn't return his calls that morning, he felt a silent dread. He used the spare key to enter the peaceful residence. The sun was golden now, slanting through the windows like molten glass. He called out once or twice. No response. When he went onto the balcony, his heart stopped. There she was, laying motionless with her phone beside her, her eyes closed, her countenance calm in contrast to the turmoil she must have felt in those dying seconds. He hurried to her side, calling her name and gently shaking her, then harder. No response. His voice crackled. He called for assistance, but deep down he knew. The paramedics verified what he had dreaded. Cardiac arrest. Sudden and fast. Possible cause, stress or emotional shock. He did not need to speculate what had caused it. The phone still showed the image that had destroyed her heart. He picked it up, stared at it, then softly turned it off. The news of Taylor's death echoed through the Foresters like a thunderclap. Steffi flew back from Monaco as soon as she heard, barely able to comprehend what had occurred. When told, Brooke fell silent. For once there were no words. Ridge stood in startled awe. The woman who had once been everything to him, who had supported him through some of his worst years, was no longer there. At the memorial, the mood was heavy with grief and disbelief. Taylor had been so alive, present and steady. People talked of her compassion, strength, and brilliance. However, underlying the warm words was a quieter debate. Everyone knew. They didn't say it out, but they knew exactly what had broken her. Brooke didn't speak at the service. She stood calmly in black, her countenance unreadable. Ridge remained in his seat the entire time. He glanced ahead, eyes vacant, as if still trying to figure out how this had happened. Steffi remained at her mother's grave long after everyone else had left. The cemetery was silent, with the wind rustling the big trees surrounding her. She knelt and touched the chilly marble, her hand trembling. "I'm sorry, Mom," she muttered. "I should have known how much it still stung. I thought you were okay. I thought you'd made peace with everything. But you were still waiting for him, right?" Her voice cracked, but she continued on. "He selected her again. Just as always. And now you are gone. But I won't remember you like this. I will remember you as the lady who never gave up fighting, who offered everything for us, who deserved so much more." Behind her, Thomas stood quietly, his own anguish engraved deep onto his features. He said nothing. There were no words left to explain what they'd lost. In the days that followed, Ridge was a shadow of himself. The shame adhered to him like a second skin. He repeated every discussion with Taylor in which he rejected her concerns or ignored her feelings. He remembered her eyes the last time he saw her, tired and yearning, as if she was asking for something he no longer knew how to provide. Brooke attempted to console him, but the weight of Taylor's death hovered over them. Every time he glanced at her, he saw the results of a decision he'd made 100 times before. This time the cost was too steep. Months passed, yet the discomfort persisted. Taylor's disappearance caused a vacuum in their family that could not be filled. Her presence had been a calming factor, a voice of reason amid the tumult. That voice had been silent. Nonetheless, she persisted in little ways. Steffi raised her children with calm strength. In the manner Thomas sketched, he discovered beauty even in misery. The family gathered together more frequently, rather than allowing old wounds to fester as they had in the past. Taylor's death was both a tragedy and a reckoning, a reminder that hearts can only be broken so many times until they finally give out. That love, when used recklessly, causes scars that do not always heal. And that some people, no matter how tough, continue to suffer silently. Ridge made frequent visits to her grave. Not every day. However, he was seen frequently enough that the groundskeepers knew he should be ignored. He didn't say anything while he was there. He would sit sometimes for hours deep in thought. One day he brought flowers, white lilies, her favorite, and tenderly put them at the grave. He sat back on the bench and eventually spoke. "I apologize, document. I should have seen. I should have done better. I believed you were okay. But I suppose I never really knew, did I?" The wind rustled the trees above him, murmuring quietly through the leaves. "I loved you. I always did. Even when I wasn't sure how to express it. Even when I failed you. You deserved more than what I provided. You deserved peace." He stayed there until the sun began to drop, leaving deep shadows on the grass. Then he stood, touched the top of the headstone one final time and went away. Taylor Hayes was gone. However, her narrative, love and grief remained inscribed in the hearts of those she left behind. A cautionary tale. A history of resilience and suffering. A woman who sacrificed everything for love, until it took her. Did she actually say that? Many fans of the bold and the beautiful can't help but wonder about Taylor Hayes. Taylor just asked the worst question. That's because she posed the million-dollar question, which as a psychiatrist she should have answered herself. Taylor questioned Ridge in the most recent episode of the show. "What do you think was going on in Luna's head?" No, we're not making this up. Given that this is part of her job, you would expect Taylor to know the answers, but that does not appear to be the case. Of course, the internet had a lot to say about the situation. Many of them can't help but question why the writers on The Bold and the Beautiful are constantly making Taylor look bad. Do they not like her at all? Others made comments such as, "For a psychologist she gives terrible advice, and falls back into a toxic love triangle without hesitation." Did Taylor not understand what was going on in Luna's head? Someone needs to get Taylor off the show. She is a total waste of space. Another show critic noted, perhaps she wasn't asking about psychology. Ridge, a world-class fashion designer, may have been curious about Luna's tracksuit. Taylor, what may be going through her mind? Ridge, I know she interned at FC. She knows better. You don't wear an 80s-inspired tracksuit to a mass massacre. And there was also this comment. Only Taylor, a Dumbo psycho wacko shrink, would answer that question. Wow. Her deepest thoughts. How fortunate her patients are, as the writers repeatedly remind us. But then again, BMB fans will just have to tune in every day to see what happens next. The Bold and the Beautiful airs weekdays on CBS. Check the local listings for times. Taylor asked the worst question, and the room hasn't been the same since. It had been a basic gathering. Friends from college, most of whom had not seen each other in over a year, crowded into Cassie's cramped but bright apartment on the outskirts of town. The music was soft, the drinks flowed easily, and the night had the sleepy appeal of something that didn't need to strive too hard to be fun. People had slipped into their old patterns, telling jokes that only made sense to those who had sobbed over failed grades or danced on sticky bar floors. The air was heavy with memories, and even the inexpensive wine seemed to taste better when shared with familiar people. But then Taylor posed that question, which no one expected and no one knew how to answer. It wasn't loud, not screamed, and wasn't even intended for the entire room. But a slight lull in the discourse at the perfect time sent his voice like a dart, sharp and rapid, to every corner of the room. Do you believe any of us peaked in college? It hung there. People blinked, looked sideways at one another, and shuffled in their seats. For a moment, the only sounds were the refrigerator's hum and the faint clink of ice melting in a glass. Not that the question was really offensive, but it was raw. Came near to the bone. It was the type of question that made you examine your life under a microscope when you weren't ready to do so. Peak. The word had gravitas. Peaked indicated the finest part had already over. Peaked means you'd reached the pinnacle of your tail arc. Peaked indicated that everything afterward was a long, gradual descent. Nobody wanted to be the first to answer. Even Taylor, who had asked it, appeared to be unsure of his own voice. It's always easy to make fun of the past, to laugh about terrible mistakes and unpleasant recollections, but this time was different. This was not a joke about vomiting up on the university grass or crying over a breakup. This was existential. Cassie was the first to try to calm the situation down. She laughed too loudly and went for the chips. Well, if I peaked during finals week my senior year, someone needs to come slap me. A few quiet, uneasy chuckles followed. Someone mentioned something about adulthood, bills and jobs, and how this immediately eliminated post-college life from being bad. However, no one disputed the central point of the inquiry. Not yet. Layla ultimately leaned forward, chin in hand, and voiced what everyone was secretly thinking. What if we did? Silence again. The kind of silence that almost creates a noise of its own. Even the refrigerator appeared to pause. Not saying we definitely did, she quickly added, but her tone was milder now, as if she was trying not to reveal the truth that was hidden in the corner. But maybe for some of us that was it. This was the time when we felt most alive. The most linked. The most ourselves. This opened something. Suddenly everyone had something to say. The words did not tumble over each other as they typically did at parties. This was not a scream for attention. It was something else. Calm, even respectful. Confessional. Malcolm discussed how he used to believe he was meant to create novels. Filling notebooks with half-finished ideas he imagined would change the world. He now makes his career by proofreading legal contracts. The salary was excellent, and his apartment overlooked a park, but he hadn't written anything more imaginative than a birthday card in 4 years. Jenna acknowledged that she still compared her current friendships to the tumultuous, all-consuming bond she had with her freshman-year roommate. They'd stayed up all night talking about everything and everything, sobbed over the same heartbreaks, and imagined themselves attending each other's weddings. They hadn't communicated for nearly 2 years. Zach had got married. He had a child. A beautiful toddler who, like dinosaurs, awoke him at 6 a.m. every morning. He stated he was pleased, truly, sincerely delighted, but he couldn't deny that enjoyment was accompanied by tiredness, stress, and a longing for a time when he could sleep until noon and spend the entire day doing nothing without feeling guilty. And then there was Taylor, who simply glanced down at his hands and remarked, "I'm not sure why I said that. It just came out." Nobody blamed him. If anything, folks were thankful. Because once the topic was posed, it was impossible not to consider your own life in its light. Had you done what you were supposed to do? Had you been the person you wished to be? Had it already happened without your knowledge, that moment when you were your finest self, and everything since has been an echo? People discussed the occupations they'd taken and the dreams they'd abandoned. The long commutes, the co-workers they didn't particularly enjoy, and the hobbies they promised to resume one day. Someone quipped that maturity felt like a trap you didn't realize you were stepping into. You grow up believing you'll be different, that you'll find the loophole and live the dream. And then 5 years later you're setting alarms, creating spreadsheets, and wondering what the heck happened. However, not all was grim. The night did not turn into despair. As the talk progressed, it began to alter. People started talking about the tiny victories, things they didn't expect to enjoy but did. The deeper relationships, the talents they'd learned, the quiet delights that didn't make an appearance but lingered. Like knowing how to make something exceptionally well, or eventually going to therapy, or recognizing that you could love someone not for how they made you feel, but for who they were, even on their worst day. Cassie once believed that life was all about chasing the largest feeling, the most spectacular high. She now found comfort in the calm, regular rhythms of watering her plants, going food shopping on Sundays, and waving to her neighbor every morning. Taylor listened. He didn't say much after that, just nodded sometimes, as if he was trying to file everything away. When the party emptied out and individuals started packing their belongings, there was an odd sense of closeness in the air. As if something significant had been acknowledged, something genuine, and everyone had touched it. Nobody suggested that one chat fixed everything, but it did open a door. Maybe it didn't matter if they'd peaked or not. Perhaps the whole concept of a peak was the problem. As if life were a single mountain that you climbed, reached the summit, and then descended. Perhaps it was more of a series of hills. Perhaps you climbed, descended, and climbed again. Perhaps the scenery varied each time, and occasionally the climb was worthwhile solely for the individuals you met on the trail. Taylor waited after most people had left. He helped Cassie clean up by emptying drinks, tossing away napkins, and scrubbing the counter. There was a silence between them, not uneasy but complete. Finally she asked, "Are you okay?" He nodded. "Yeah. Just thinking about peaking?" She asked with a half-smile. He shrugged. "I do not know. Maybe I was so concentrated on determining whether I'd already had the finest part of my life that I forgot to strive to create new wonderful parts." She leaned across and softly caressed his arm. "You're not done yet, Taylor. What do you think?" "I understand." He grinned slightly. It wasn't a big smile, the kind that could mend everything, but it was real. Outside, the streetlights painted the sidewalk a lovely gold. A siren sounded in the distance. Cassie said goodnight, and Taylor headed outside into the night air. It was cooler than expected, so he zipped up his jacket as he walked. Malcolm had sent him a message and his phone buzzed. Just a meme. Something foolish and humorous about adulthood being a fraud. But he laughed. And for a brief moment it didn't matter if college had been the best experience of his life. What mattered was that he was still present, still breathing, still laughing, still asking questions, even bad ones. Because the toughest question may not be whether you've reached your top. Perhaps the worst question is one you never ask at all.